G'day everyone, long time no see. Um, Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the television industry in China because I worked in television in China for a state media outlet, Guangdong Radio and Television, for about 12 years. And gosh, I started working in television about 16 years ago. So the industry has changed a lot since then. And because I was so inside the Guangdong provincial television world, I thought that what was happening was just like a local thing in China, in Guangdong. But actually, it's been happening all over the world. And, you hear things like, big, huge legacy media planning a digital-only future a decade from now. And you think, wow, something that kind of dominated our lives for a long time. I don't know. I was a 90s kid, and a lot of your life was kind of planned around television. Like, if you wanted to watch something on TV, you'd have to be home at 7 o'clock on a Sunday to watch Big Brother and Gretel Colleen. I'm a bit of a fan of TV like that. Anyway, so I started working for GDTV, that's what it was called at the time, Guangdong Television, in around 2010, late 2010. And at that time, I was presenting an English talk show, because Guangdong Television as a network, they had, just recently launched an international channel. And, the stated aim of this international channel was to reach, millions of people overseas and promote China to the world. And at that time, things were different. So, promoting China was about filming beautiful documentaries and, have food shows and it was all about tourism and the amazing food and the culture. So it wasn't politically laced and charged content as it is today. And so, me as a 20-year-old young Aussie, I just graduated from university. I'd studied Mandarin Chinese, and I had done some covers of some Chinese songs and posted them to Chinese social media websites while I was at uni, and they went viral, and millions of people watched them. They had millions of views, and this is in 2009, 2010. At that time, millions of views online was a big deal. And so there were news shows in China. They had segments on me, and they were showing my videos of me singing online and saying things like, oh, this guy could get a top score in the Chinese proficiency test because he can sing Jay Cho. And so I was like, ooh, something might happen there. And then so I went over there, and I ran into a producer from GDTV, and he interviewed me about my singing. And then one of the leaders came and asked if I'd be interested in hosting, and I kind of ummed and ahed, or pretended I did. And I said yes, and I came home, got my stuff packed up, and went over there, and the rest is history. But anyway, so that's how I got into television in China. And when I first started in television over there, it's hard to imagine now because of all of the focus that has been placed on Chinese propaganda. But at the time, things were changing for the better, from my perspective, okay? I'm a Westerner. I believe in liberal values and freedom of speech and all those wonderful things. And things were changing for the better. I had a favorite show on our network, and it was called The Key or Password to Happiness. And it was the closest thing I had ever seen to the Chinese version of Jerry Springer. It was these families that would just bring their drama to this big stage in front of a huge audience and argue about it. But it had a wholesome touch, being China. So in the end, they all, if they didn't make up, the host tried to sugarcoat things and, have a bit of a moral at the end. So, things were like that. And hosting my English talk show called FaceTime, the only rules ever explained to me were, do not call Taiwan a country, and do not say that Hong Kong is a country. Also, don't talk about Falun Gong. I didn't really know what that was at the time. I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'm just talking about local things in Guangdong and culture and music and food and, oh, you're an expat here. What are you doing? And for many years, like, it felt like something good was coming out of what I was doing, and the conditions that enabled me to be doing what I was doing. Because, there was an international channel, and Guangzhou had just hosted a couple of years earlier the Asian Games. So there was an English channel established by Guangzhou Television, and so Guangdong Television wanted to, come in and have a piece of the pie and sort of, compete and have its own English channel, but it never got local broadcasting rights, so that's another story. Anyway, that's how I got into television in China. And it was fun, and it was exciting, and I got to meet amazing people. And over time, I started doing a little bit more. I started hosting or presenting a sports program, like a weekly news program about sports. A lot of it was like local Guangdong sports, but it had a bit of a mix of international sporting events, that China had taken part in or whatever. A travel show, mainly around Guangdong, so I've pretty much been everywhere in Guangdong, but also to provinces, Hainan and Hunan and Guangxi, sort of the surrounding provinces. It was called the Great Walk of China, but it focused mainly on Guangdong. And then I started doing news as well. So, and as I said, I understand, based on what people think now about Chinese media and propaganda. I get it. It's changed. It's evolved. But at that time, the news program that I was hosting, it wasn't for an international audience. I mean, I guess to get the funding from the government, it was a news program that was like a wrap-up of local Guangdong news for an international audience that went to, broadcast on Guangdong TV World to nobody, because nobody was watching that channel, I can tell you. Like, okay, the ratings were actually better than CCTV's version of it at the time, because a lot of overseas Chinese people were from Guangdong, and think about your grandma and grandpa, like they still watch TV and listen to the radio, and so like that service was basically for those people, but it wasn't really, it was just, and that was its stated purpose, but it actually was also broadcast locally on the news channel. So my news program in English with Chinese subtitles was broadcast every day at a pretty good time slot as well. I'm pretty sure at a period of time it was 7 p.m. and then rebroadcast again at 11 p.m. But like, I was hosting that, and it reached literally millions and millions of Chinese people. Like, yes, it was supposed to be for an international audience, broadcast overseas, but it was broadcast on like a satellite network that nobody could tune into. So, I was like, I'm happy doing this because I have a platform that reaches millions of people. And in the beginning, I was only hosting, but, I started proofreading, and then I started editing stories, and then I started writing my own stories, and then I started putting together my own packages. And so it was like an evolution over time, and I was there for, at GDTV, which turned into GRT, for 12 years. But during that time I had left, and I went to another station for a little bit because I wanted more money from GDTV, and they wouldn't give it to me, and the boss kind of said, without us there's no use. Anyway, so I left for more money, and then came back after 6 months because I got fired from the other place, and luckily GDTV would have me back. And they, gave me what I wanted in the end. Anyway, the point is, the show that I was hosting was broadcast locally to millions of people. So for years and years and years, I had a platform that could reach millions of people, and I had input in the content. Some of the packages I produced on my own independently. Some of them were my colleagues' packages, and I was just reading the lead in. But as an Australian, Like, I was still 29, 30, 31 at the time, and I had won the China News Award first prize in 2016 for a report that I had worked on with a couple of colleagues, on Guangdong, Australia trade relations, and I won first prize, China News Award first prize. Like, that's unheard of. Like, so many Chinese journalists like fight their whole lives to get that award, and I won it as a bogan Aussie from Ipswich. And yeah, so like that gave me some leverage and some freedom, and also the way I had it set up, because most of my work I was doing for the television arm of GRT, but I actually signed with the radio arm. So I was signed to the radio news center of GRT, but I was doing most of my work at the TV station. But the reason why that worked for me is because I had a little bit of leverage. If there was something the TV station wanted me to do and I didn't want to do it, I'd just say I had work at the radio. Or if there was something I really didn't want to do, I'd just go and talk to one of my bosses at the radio arm and say, if I do that, I'm going to look stupid, or, I'm not happy with that. And then they would say, don't do it. And then I could go and tell the boss at the TV station, sorry, my boss there, who I have to listen to because of this hierarchical system that we're all in, says I can't do it, so see ya. And that worked for me for a long time. So over the years, television changed. So in the beginning, like, I can honestly say there was very little political content related to my work. Like, there was no politics. I hated politics. I would always say, I'm not doing politics. No politics, just fun things where I can interact with people and learn something. And that was always my focus. So, but things did change over the years. But they changed a lot slower in Guangdong compared to other places in China. I now know. But just to give you like an idea of the scope of work I was doing, I hosted travel shows, documentaries, news programs. I had a radio news program and a television news program. The radio news program was within the top 10 highest news programs in Guangdong province for years and years and years and years. Most of those years while I was hosting it. So that was another platform that I had to reach millions of Chinese people every day in their cars, listening to the radio, going to work. And we had a bilingual news program, okay? And like, you might think, oh, why would they have all these bilingual things and English news in Guangdong? Well, Guangdong is like the trade capital of China. It's a melting pot of cultures as well. It has the largest expat population or foreign national population in China. You'd think it'd be Shanghai, but it's actually Guangzhou. And it is a very international city. It's close to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is bilingual. Guangzhou always tried to just be Hong Kong, just on the mainland. And so everything sort of has to be international, and, the international event and the international fair, and everything has to be in 5 languages. So that's Guangdong, okay? And that's why I liked Guangdong, because it's a bit of a cultural melting pot, even though it's in China, which is this, trying to portray itself as this monoculture, So, yeah, anyway, lost track. So I hosted news programs, documentaries, I hosted kids shows, I co-hosted kids shows, I was a regular guest on a lot of kids shows, and I was a host on a lot of kids show competitions, like singing competitions and English competitions and hosting competitions. Like, I was a host, a judge. And so, I guess people kind of only see like the English news side of things, with my work, but that was just a small little aspect of what I was doing, and it was kind of my foot in the door. And even though things were supposed to be for an international audience, I was clear the whole time, most of our audience were there in China, in Guangdong, and most of the channels that I worked on only broadcast within Guangdong, but we had like a national channel, and I was on quite a few shows on that national channel as well. So for a couple of years, like nearly every Sunday, I was on like a national nationally broadcast show on the national channel, you know, because they'd sort of cycle me through all the shows. So yeah, like I reached millions and millions and millions and millions of Chinese people. And so like I can tell you, like I felt when the television industry was dying, because, you know, in the first couple of years that I was there, like I'd do a TV show, and then if it was broadcast that day, I'd go home and, pardon me, you know, I'd have hundreds of comments on my Weibo, which is like the Chinese Twitter, talking about what I'd done, or I don't know, like sometimes I'd go on there and like people would just taking photos of me on the subway and being like, is this you? And like I was in my daggiest clothes and but yeah, so I could feel that people were interacting a lot with the programming and television. And then probably like around 2015, the shift to online started. And like I can tell you the attitude among people in the television sector in China at the time. Well, in Guangdong, I say China, but Guangdong. If I say China, please just remember I'm talking about Guangdong. Was basically that like, oh, this internet stuff is so like beneath us, and we're television, and like, oh, no one's ever gonna, you know, fully turn to the internet. We're always gonna need us at the television. And that attitude like stuck around probably until like 2017, 2018. And then that's when a lot of people were trying to leave, or like trying to find opportunities elsewhere, because funding was drying up. Advertising was leaving, which was a big turning point, I would say, in like the development of propaganda and television in China. It was advertisers leaving in droves, not because, you know, they were against what was being broadcast on television, just because people weren't watching anymore, because it's television and you can go online. And if anyone knows anything about China, like online services in China, aside from the censorship, they're next level. They are amazing. So easy to use. You can find anything, well, you know, outside of the censorship problem. And so that was when a lot of the programming shifted in television, because the biggest customer no longer was commercial advertisers in private companies, it was government departments. And so I would say probably from about 2017 to about 2020-ish, like even into the beginning of the pandemic, I feel like in Guangdong, at Guangdong Radio and Television, the radio arm and the television arm, everyone was trying to keep television and radio alive, because they were passionate about it. They'd worked in the industry for decades or years, and they had seen things getting better. So at Guangdong Radio and Television, the radio station was the first ever radio station in China to launch a live call-in program with a hotline, and they would invite government officials to sit there live and answer these calls from local people complaining about local issues. And it was kind of groundbreaking at the time. It was the first in China. And so, you know, that kind of tells you like why I was in Guangdong doing what I was doing, because Guangdong had always been at the forefront of reform and opening up. And I know that, you know, you don't hear about it anymore, so probably people aren't sick of hearing it. But when I was in China, it was almost like you couldn't say anything without mentioning reform and opening up. Like, and looking back, I have really fond memories of reform and opening up. Sounds silly to say, it's a political slogan, but I do, because people took it to heart, and people had this mentality that China's opening up and it's becoming more international and it's reforming and changing for the better, and everything was incrementally and slowly until Xi Jinping came in and really, you know, started making change. So things were kind of normal for his first term, but then from his second term on, that's when things changed. Anyway, so advertising dried up. The biggest funding source for programming was the government, and then obviously, if, you know, your survival depends on how happy your sponsors are, and the sponsor is the government, you're going to start changing, you know, how you, I guess, package programming. You're like, the same kind of shows kept happening, but they got rebranded into like the Greater Bay Area singing competition instead of, you know, Cantonese, the Voice of Canton, or, you know, like things like that. And so things started drying up, and like new projects were happening. They were all political. So anyway, in 2019, this is kind of just context for the greater scheme of things. In 2019, my husband, his name was Wayne, a Chinese national, passed away at 34 years old from a heart attack. I was 29 at the time. That was December 2019, just before the pandemic. Sorry if I look a bit emotional. I've been thinking about things this morning and I'm a bit, whew. Anyway, yeah, so he passed away when I was 29, and that's just, context. And the pandemic happened, and then this industry that I had worked in for a decade, it was just changing and shifting, and, my whole life was turning upside down. And like before the pandemic, like people would always say things like, oh, it's so great, what you're doing and having an Australian face and voice on television in China, and you're like our unofficial ambassador to Australia. That was one of the consul generals at the Australian consulate said when he introduced me to a former Prime Minister of Australia at an event. But then it shifted during the pandemic, and I think it was mostly political and ideological, and I was dealing with I was grieving my late husband and dealing with all of that, plus the political quagmire, and, and then this industry that I had loved and contributed to and felt optimistic about was just dying. And, but I held on for as long as I could, because my show, the reason, my foot in the door, it was still getting the funding. And because Guangdong is a very special place. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, it kind of is as far removed from Beijing as you can get in mainland China, just because it's Guangdong and people speak Cantonese and it's very insular, and even like the entertainment industry in Guangdong is very insular. There are like very famous Guangdong singers in Guangdong, but people outside of Guangdong have never heard who they are. And that's kind of rare. Like, usually in China, you just have national fame or no fame. But in Guangdong, you can have provincial fame and then go on to national fame. But anyway, I digress. My little corner of Chinese state media was still holding on and was still getting funding. And by that stage, I had proven myself. I had the China News Award. So, plus I had my expert certificate in broadcasting, which was also hard to get. So I was allowed to do what I was doing. I had the documents to prove that I could do what I was doing. And that's why I could hold on for so long, because there were always attempts to push me out. Okay? Like, everyone kind of had this view of me that I was a propagandist and I just say whatever I was told to say for the right amount of money. But that's so far from the truth, like, it's, unless you're actually in the system, you don't know what's going on. Like, a lot of sabotage happens. A lot of people, you'd call it corruption sometimes, but a lot of people just like took money to do things and then did them as poorly as possible, because that was just their way of getting back at the government or society for not watching TV anymore or what. Like, and then, within the TV station, there were, as time went on, more and more people who were very, very supportive of the government, and, like nationalists. The TV station was getting full of nationalists, but there were still people that had been journalists for decades who were holding on and had been part of the positive change over decades that saw media in Guangdong open up a bit more, allow criticism of the government. A lot of national scandals break in Guangdong by Guangdong media, or they did in the past. And obviously people that have been a part of that for years, and I was a part of that for years too, even though I'm a foreigner, like, I was learning from these people. And, they would hold on too, and you could sort of see, oh, I know what you're doing. And they would be like, oh, I know what you're doing. But, it had to be all very sort of hush-hush. And, like, my news program, that had a local audience, and people were calling me a propagandist because I might say a few random things on Twitter, and I wasn't, in the best headspace at the time because I was grieving my late husband and I was alone during COVID, and hello, mental health, duh. Most of what I was saying was being heard by a local Chinese audience, and I got in trouble sometimes for saying things I shouldn't. Actually, quite often, you know, people would... Anyway, I don't want to go into too many details because a lot of people still work there, and I don't want to say things that could get people in trouble. Like, I don't want to hurt anybody. But yeah, by the end, television was dead and everyone knew it. Everyone knew it. And I don't know, I feel like the same thing is kind of happening here in Australia. I would have loved to have been a television host again. I love talking to people, and I loved interviewing people, and I loved the fact that, like, you had a kind of a social pass to just talk to people and ask them personal questions. Like, if you told them I'm from, especially in Guangdong, and I had a really unique access point as a foreigner, because I could go and say to people, I'm a journalist at Guangdong Radio and Television, can I ask you some questions? Oh, sure. And then they would be so open to me because they knew what I could and couldn't write, you know? And, like, if I did an official interview with them, like, they would say all the right things, and as soon as the camera was off, that's when the truth would come out. And I was there as an Australian, like, in that position. And I think also because I was a foreigner, and I was saying I'm at Guangdong Radio and Television, all of the people interviewing me, they thought, this person cannot have any editorial control, so I'll say what I want, and the people, you know, doing the editing will cut the naughty bits out or whatever. But, like, sometimes I did have the editorial control. And so, had the television industry not been dying, I think I probably maybe might have thought a little bit more before leaving China, but I was fighting to hold on to a platform that was just losing its relevance and importance, and I'm still proud of the content that I produced and the news that I put out. And you can go onto my website, hazzachina.com. I've got an archive of a lot of my reports. Most of my reports are on there, and, you know, forgive me, like, at the time I was busy with life, so I didn't get all of them, but I tried to save a huge chunk of them, and I hope people can go there and, like, judge me based on what I actually did and not what they think I was doing or whatever. Because at the end of the day, I was an Australian who worked, you know, solidly in Guangdong media for a decade. I reached millions of people directly in their language for a decade. And, you know, for many, many years, I was the only foreigner at Guangdong Television. So, and, like, so I think my experience in television was a little bit different to foreigners, say, working in central media or in Shanghai, because in a lot of those places, they have entire departments that are like the international department, and all the foreign employees assigned to that department, and all the, you know, people that work in that department speak multiple languages and are very, you know, international. But at Guangdong Television, it was just me. And I was working alongside Chinese people most of the time for programming that was broadcast locally to a local audience. And so my co-hosts were, you know, professional television hosts, and they hadn't just been in the industry for a long time. They studied their craft. In China, you can actually study to be a television host at university. There's a specific degree called, like, television broadcasting, presenting, or whatever. And so you can study to be a host. And I feel sorry for people still studying that, because they're not going to have many jobs to go to soon, unfortunately. But anyway, so this whole time I was working alongside people who were serious about their work. You know, it wasn't propaganda, or it was media work. It was journalism. And I'm actually grateful that I was put in that situation, because I took my job seriously as well. Very seriously, probably a little bit too seriously, and it kind of took a toll. But at least from my perspective, you know, the Guangdong media ecosystem was always a little bit separate from the rest of China, was always a little bit slower to react than the rest of China politically. And I can, honestly say that the majority of my work was not propaganda, okay? And if it was, I did my best to, make it decent. And made sure that, if I was involved, there were no ethical concerns or, people weren't being deceived. Like, that was kind of my bottom line, and I stuck to it till the end. And on the day that I was packing up my desk, one of my leaders got an intern to call me into his office, and he cried. I might cry now thinking about it, but he said, that he really appreciated my, I don't know how to translate it properly, like the steadfast attitude I had to sticking to what was right, And we had our disagreements over the years. I had disagreements with so many of my colleagues, I had great times with them too. But I think because my whole experience was just so insular. It was a local Guangdong experience. Like most of the programs that I was on, like I said earlier, there were some shows that were broadcast nationally, but Guangdong television, it always didn't rank highly in terms of the national ratings. Like there were a couple of shows that did really well, and I was a part of a couple of them. But it was the local stuff that went really well. That people in Guangdong enjoy consuming Guangdong media, either in Cantonese or with a little bit of Cantonese flavour. Locally produced stuff. It's always been like that. And yeah, like I miss it. I really, really, really miss it. I don't think I'll ever be involved in anything as exciting. And I'm talking about the earlier years. I'm not talking about the later years. I really do not have fond memories of the later years in China, especially after my husband died. But yeah, it was fun. It was changing. It was like things were, like maybe in 2012, I might feel like, I might be a bit cautious in saying this, but then in 2013 it was like, I can say that now. Oh, things are getting, things are improving. But yeah, it was when advertisers left that things started to shift from my perspective. Obviously there was a push from the central government as well. But yeah, everyone sort of thought in the beginning, like, after people started getting over the fact that the internet was taking over and replacing television, I think people sort of felt like, maybe the internet is going to be what opens China up. But the internet kind of killed television, and television was a medium that had a lot of human participation. So there were a lot of moving parts, a lot of people checking content, and like even me, I was in there, and if I see someone say something and I'm associated to it, I'll sort of kick up a bit of a stink and say I'm not being involved if that's going to be included. So even me as a foreigner had that kind of input. So like television, I feel like there was more room for loopholes and, like getting information out there than the internet, because the internet with algorithms and sensors, it's just so quick, There were times actually, while I was working for the TV station on a news program, that I broadcast censored content, after it had been censored online, and I broadcasted it on my show, which then, was also online as well. So, like, it's more complex than people think, and I don't know, I just have all of these experiences and all of this, like, knowledge trapped inside of me, and I don't know who to share it with, because, like, I had a very unique experience compared to all of my Chinese colleagues. So even though we had a lot of shared experiences and they can get me and understand me in a lot of respects, there are just some things that they can never understand. And probably if I spoke to someone who'd worked as a television host and a news presenter here in Australia for a decade, like there would be things that I would say that they would not understand either. So it's kind of like a bit of a lonely existence of like, you know, while I was a singer and releasing my own original Chinese music and like actually getting some chart success in China, I was also doing all this television stuff in China as a foreigner. And so like, because I was sort of on my own the whole time, I didn't really compare myself to anyone else or like have anyone to talk to about things. I just did things and like, yeah, so now here I am. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Chinese television for now and my interactions with it. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment below and I'll try and find some time to answer. And I think I might be ready to start talking about a few more things on this YouTube channel. So if there's a topic you'd like me to talk about or you have any questions, also leave me a comment below, and who knows, maybe I'll do another video like this in 6 months or 1 year or who knows when it is. But when I do, hopefully there'll be some comments so I can get some inspiration. Anyway, that's that. And hope you all, sorry, I shouldn't say yous. See, I'm a bogan Aussie again. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye for now.